Hello, thank you for joining us. I think most of you know us, but this is my mom, Carol, Jim's wife of 45 years, my sister, Casey, and I'm Rose, Jim's youngest. We just want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is certainly not the service that I had ever pictured for my dad. He always went to other people's funerals. Always, even if he didn't want to. I think he just felt that he wanted to show people how much they meant to him. He wanted to show their family how much they meant to him. He always took care of his parents' graves on a regular basis. He just really always honored those that came before us, and I always pictured his funeral would be full of friends and family. So thank you for joining us, even though this is a little bit different. You're going to hear some sharing from some of his family and closest friends. He had a full, interesting life. You're going to hear some of the stories. Most of those stories all happened before I was born. I was the youngest, so the second half of his life was certainly not as interesting as the first half. Not all my fault. But I grew up with this web of friends and family that he and my mom had put together before I was born, and I got to grow up in it. Also, I grew up hearing all these stories of his life. He was certainly not your average dad for me. He absolutely gave me the love of the Orioles and baseball. We always had a few special things that we did together. He took me to opening day, the final year of Memorial Stadium, took me out of school for that. The car did break down on the way home, so it was classic Jim Collison, but it was an amazing day besides that. Oh, I think it overheated. In my lifetime, there was a lot of stability. I'm the youngest. I was the only one who lived in the same house pretty much my whole life since I was 4 years old. I went to one school. He started working at the post office when I was a child and went every day for us, for the stability. And it wasn't something that he loved. He definitely did the things that he loved outside of work. I grew up with music in the house every Sunday morning, with art in the house, with his photographs all over the place. So he did all of those things that he loved, and he still made time for them, even though eventually he settled down and really gave us quite a stable life. And he always made time for playing pool, even when he was sick here at the end. When he made his appointments, and there were a lot at the end, he would say, any day but Wednesday. That was the day he played pool. And he always made time to go to Peter and Shelley's on Sundays, or if there was a game. There were his places that really gave him comfort. And now you're probably going to hear a lot more of the interesting side of his life. So we're going to do that. But first, my mom is going to read a passage.
Well, Jim didn't very often speak about things of God, but he did have two favorite psalms that he often talked about. And I just want to give thanks to God for my life with Jim and for his faithfulness and his hard work, and that he was a very decent human being and husband. This is Psalm 100. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness, and come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he that has made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him, and praise his name. For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. Amen.
And so now you're going to hear from Dad's closest friends and loved ones. And we thank you just to take a minute and sit back and listen.
Hi, everybody. The term a gentle giant is usually invoking of an image of a large person or an animal that's big in physique, whom also happens to be gentle. My Uncle Jim was a gentle giant, but he was not large in size. Rather, he was a giant in character and in his outpouring of love. He gave his family and friends giant love. He was a giant of a human being. In a room full of strangers, he's the guy that you'd be drawn to. You would have to know his story because those eyes said, "I have stories to tell." And boy, did they. When I was 15, I started listening to the Grateful Dead. I found a Grateful Dead songbook in my parents' bookshelf with the most amazing artwork on the cover. Soon after, I picked up a tape from Record and Tape Traders in Annapolis to see what it was all about. The rest was history. When I got a little older, I started going to see live and local music, and I started running into Uncle Jim at these events. I thought he was so cool because he was playing and hanging out with the musicians that I was going to see. I thought I had the coolest uncle ever, and I actually did. But he was more than just cool. He was open, accepting, funny, intensely interesting, ornery, an encyclopedia of knowledge, resourceful, inventive, quick-witted, giant, and gentle. He lived a giant life, which helps us all who are left behind in our grief. It makes it easy for us to celebrate his life, which is exactly what he would want, a celebration full of stories.
Hello, everyone. It's Shelley and Peter Finkelstein from Annapolis, Maryland.
Hi guys, I'm wearing my Orioles paraphernalia in honor of Jimmy. I'm going to let Shelley do all the speaking for us today, so let her rip.
Thanks, honey. Hi, everyone. Our world is not the same without Jimmy's physical presence in it, but I feel he is smiling and shining his light upon us today. Heartstrings is a word I've been thinking about lately. I've felt it pulled, tugging us all together, all of his friends and loved ones. From his beloved Annapolis, Jimmy's wanderlust took him on endless adventures, attracting young people, young and old, like the Pied Piper that he was. I think the essence of this kind and gentle man was his ability to make each and every one of us feel special, from his youngest grandchild to his oldest friends and acquaintances. He brought out the best in each and every one of us and made us feel like he was our own Jimmy. As I thought about what to say today, I thought about what he would want us to do, and I think he would want us to be happy, to keep him in our hearts, and for us to stay connected and continue his legacy of peace, love, and music. We all have a story to share, a song, a picture, a tale of an adventure, or a favorite quote by which we will forever remember our friend. For us, Sundays meant Jimmy. We came to Annapolis in 1973, Peter as a wine specialist to Mills, and me to finish my last semester of college and begin my 30-year teaching career. Not having any friends or family here, we were blessed by being welcomed into a loving tribe of eclectic characters, many of whom are with us today. Our twins, Benjamin and Jennifer, were born in 1974 and were lucky to grow up with a brood that included Collison, Badger, and Johnson kids, and featured family baseball, Easter egg hunts at Patty's, hobbit parties at the Badgers, field trips, and babysitter parties with Jeannie while we attended Dead shows. Our children grew up together, and Jimmy made an indelible impression on all of them. In the early days, Jimmy and I met for our own spiritual hour, often joined by Miller, and Harry and other special friends for our at-homes, to quote Gertrude Stein. We listened to music, Jim often playing his guitar and singing. He brought news articles and comic strips he'd saved for show and tell, and we had passionate political discussions. And of course, Jimmy told and retold his stories about all of you and his countless journeys. How I would love to share just one more cup of coffee for the road. After our kids grew up and left home, Sunday afternoons were reserved for sports as Peter and Jimmy shared a love for the Orioles and Terps, Colts, then Ravens. Jimmy would come up our driveway with his coffee cup and his boombox in hand, ready to record the games. Of course, we had a lot of laughs when he forgot to turn the tape over. I must admit my own sports enthusiasm was really because of how I realized how much fun it was to hang out with these guys. I remember eventually really getting to love the Ravens, but I think it had a lot to do with the color purple that I so loved. And later I adopted the Terps and the O's as well. I often graded papers during baseball, but wasn't allowed to do that during Terps or Ravens games. Our house and Peter's cave were home to smoking cigars and watching endless sports, punctuated by discussions about sports trivia, memories by these lifelong friends, and often stories of their own athletic pursuits. We also continued sharing music, even coming up with a list of songs or albums we would select if we were stranded on a desert island. And we shared political views and concerns, and of course we watched some of Jimmy's movies, which, truth be told, Peter wasn't much a fan of. Sundays will remain emotional for us, but not sad, I hope. Our hearts are full of love and gratitude. I close by saying that we were blessed to share this camaraderie with our dearest friend right up until the end. We plan to keep Jimmy alive in our hearts forever, and we hope that these heartstrings will keep us connected to all of you. We love you, Jim. Thank you, guys.
I'm Patricia, as Jim would call me. He was only the nuns and Jim. Patricia Brevard Badger Marquito. Jim was the cornerstone of who I am today. When I was fresh out of college from Ohio State and overwhelmed, I came to visit a friend in Annapolis who we'd been in the Marine Corps, our dads together, and we were Girl Scouts in 5th grade. I came to stay with them, and I didn't know anyone in Annapolis. I rode around one day, or walked actually, around State Circle, and being a very conservative Catholic military girl of 19 years old in 1971, I see what would you call probably a hippie, a long red-haired man that literally drew me in with his kindness. I approached him and said, "Sir, would you know where I might find a job?" Looking out the window would be my future husband and the father of my children. And we got jobs at the Circle Theater, and I met everybody that I know. Candy Girl, Jeannie, projectionist Steve. Jim was a manager. Steve was the vice manager. We just had the best time. I was in the ticket booth on Main Street, the antiquated little glass booth. We shared popcorn and midnight movies and many wonderful experiences. When Jim and Carol moved to West Virginia, our favorite thing was to go on day trips to West Virginia, especially during apple season. And we'd make juice and go to the cider press and apple butter. And we had the most wonderful time. And one Valentine's Day, Jesse said he was 2, or I guess 3. "Can we go visit my little friend Casey in West Virginia, Mom?" So we hopped in the car, and we had a lovely day on Valentine's, and basically came home with Josiah. Casey and Rose were the same age, and Casey and Jesse, and Rose and Josiah. Vanessa was the ringleader and planned all the games and the fun. She was 2 when I met her. When they returned to Annapolis, we all raised our families together, our children, and we had such a wonderful time. And later on, Jim asked me, would I like to go to Holland with the Finkelsteins and them? And of course I went, and he was the captain of our beautiful small yacht, cruising down the waterways of Holland, and looking at all the windmills. We called it the Molin Cruise, or Jim did. We had chocolate and bread and cheese and schlagram and many other goodies on board. It was a magic time, and I thank God every day that Jim gave me these memories. He helped schlep the governor's pennies through the streets with Pete, trying to get the best amount for them, and so lovingly went through thousands of pennies. And he would do anything for a friend. He was the most unconditional and devoted person, non-judgmental, and the kindest soul I have ever met. He was an elder to my children and my chosen family. He was so kind to my sisters, my brother, my nephew, everyone in my family, that he will live on. Love is eternal, and he's in my heart and right here with me. And at Easter, he was my first guest and my last to leave, with his lovely grin and his camera, always with that mischievous grin to find the best place for the memorial egg. And I'm sorry and glad to say he will be the memorial egg this year, along with his dear friend John Stevens. They died within a month of each other after having been in school years ago together, I think back to elementary school. May God bless you, Jim. Thank you for making me the person I am and sharing the memories, our Grateful Dead trip together, the one where we got back and Carol said, "Is this the kind of concert where you quit your job?" We were just as is that concert too. We didn't need anything. Jim, you'll be with us always. I love you.
Hey everybody, just wanted to say thank you for being a part of this today. It certainly feels weird, but I suppose it's indicative of the times we are in at the moment. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Hanback. I'm the son of Casey and Brian Hanback and grandson of Jim and Carol Collison. I will say, this is probably my fourth time trying to record this. I've tried to write stuff out, and every time I write something out, the words as I say them just don't seem to do it justice. And I do apologize for the hat, but seeing as it's the Cats, I figured it'd be a little fitting for the moment at hand. It's truly one of these things where I'm at a loss for words, which is just unbelievably ironic considering the man we're talking about. Everybody knows he can regale with his stories with the best of them. And I just try to think about the life that he lived, all that he did in the short time to be here, you know? It's crazy what he accomplished, and not in the ways of monetary or possessions, but the people that he met and loved and was loved by. I mean, across the entire globe. I think there's no better example of the kind of man Poppy was than to see that and realize all the people that he had touched and all the people that he was important to, and they were all important to him. There was no lack of being genuine. He was a man that could talk about anything with anybody, seemed knowledgeable on just about every subject. At least that's what it seemed like. Strictly just because of how passionate he was about really anything. I mean, music, sports, his Terps basketball, his Ravens. But I think the biggest part of that was just how dedicated he was to his family. It's an odd thing to be able to look back and say, I got really lucky to be in this person's life, and I'm even luckier that they were in mine. And I think that's one thing that essentially anybody could say for Poppy, was that you felt lucky to have that time with him, to be able to spend that time with him, to make him feel good and have him make you feel good. 'Cause he was just such a loving man. And I'm sure I don't have to tell that to anybody in here, because we all know the kind of man that he was. It's hard to put it in perspective. Just everything in the past 22, 21 years that I can kind of remember being around Poppy and the entire family, and the Easters where he'd be sitting by the sack races, just taking his pictures. You'd see him in the corner taking pictures of everybody. He usually had a memorial egg somewhere on his person. And it just floods back memories of that. Just running around Patty's house, having the greatest days of our lives, and him just sitting there loving being a part of it. I feel like I could go on for hours and hours about the kind of man he was and everything that he was able to accomplish. But the thing that keeps coming back to me is just gratitude. Gratitude that I was able to be a part of his life, like I mentioned, and him a part of mine. Gratitude for him sharing stories and wisdom and just being there and being him. I mean, to be completely honest, I'm at a loss for words, because that's all I can really think of to say about is that he was just him. And I also just kind of wanted to say how thankful I am, how blessed I am to be a part of a family like ours, even though it's not by blood. It's still just an unbelievable amount of love from everybody, from Gaga and Poppy to Vanessa and Dan to Rose and Josh, and later on Eula and Anna and Kim, and even our extended family, Patty, the Badgers, the Finkelsteins. It's something that I never forget or never take for granted, is just how lucky I am to be able to be a part of this family. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, like I mentioned, this could go on for hours, just talking about him, but I won't take up all your time there. So, again, thank you everybody for being a part of this. He will certainly be missed, but he'll never ever be forgotten, and I think that's for damn sure. So thanks again. I love you, Poppy. See you guys soon.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve White. I have known Jim since I first became a teenager a long time ago. And while I'm honored to have been his friend for the entire time since, because you didn't become friends for just a passing moment, you became his friend for life. This is not unique for people who've just known him for a long time. Although his school friends are still friends, tried and true, remembering escapades past and present. He is still close to his siblings, the holders of his childhood secrets. His adult friendships are equally strong. But this happens with people who've just met him and immediately became the great friend they didn't know they had, and now they did. Knowing Jim meant you were open to adventure, fun, trying new things, re-experiencing old things, laughing, telling stories, enjoying music, telling stories, laughing, playing and watching sports, reveling in the joys of family and friendships, and telling stories. But mostly it was just being comfortable in each other's company. Conversations, silly or serious, might often get diverted, but would get picked up where they had left off, whether it was a minute, an hour, a day, or a year later. New discoveries were equally shared, some of them important, others forgettable, although the forgettable ones seemed to be really important when you were talking about them at the time. When I moved away from Annapolis, my hometown, I felt content that Jim was always there and I would have a home to which I could return. Jim Collison and Annapolis were synonymous. This is not to disparage any other Annapolis friend, but Jim, something like a 14th generation Marylander, was truly a son of Annapolis. He lives in its history, and in many respects, he was the essence of the Annapolis that most of us know and love. And Jim has often said he was born at the right time. Growing up in the fat of post-war America, Jim thrived within the greatest freedom in human history. Rather than exploit it for personal gain or gratification, he used it to harness the modern world's goodness to create a life and lifestyle that would exemplify a positive way of living. He set an example of how people should relate to others. He offered a positive way in which we should establish human relationships. In short, he showed us how to live. Jim Collison left a legacy rich beyond imagination. But we will not grieve his passing. It is not that we didn't love him. We loved him immeasurably. It is not that we won't miss him. We will every day, especially when we least expect it. But because he was too full of life, and we are also grateful to have shared the greater part of our lives with him, it would be too selfish for us to impose sadness upon a life that nurtured so much joy. And so his goodness will live on, as it now lives within each of us, whose lives he touched. He has made us all better, just by sharing our lives. For those of us fortunate enough to be family and within this large circle of friends, we have a responsibility to try to lead the rest of our lives with the grace and dignity with which Jim lived his. And it is up to us to utilize as best we can the joy in which he helped instill in each of us. And so I say to you, my brother, I'm grateful for our time together. I am blessed to call you my friend. I love you more than words can tell. I will love you eternally through time and space, and I will raise a cup of warm milk with a tinge of coffee to you and say, here's looking at you, kid. Happy trails to you till we meet again. May the four winds blow you safely home. We won't see your legs again.
Jim E. Collison. So much I could say, but I will try to keep it short. I'll start with when I first saw him. It was in San Francisco in '67 or '68, one of those foggy years. It was in the Haight, and I knew I would never forget that guy. He was skinny, with the biggest, bushiest head of red hair I'd ever seen. Fast forward to Annapolis about a year later. I was looking out of a window in an apartment above Tillman's jewelry store when that same fellow went riding around State Circle on a motorcycle. His hair and a black cape were flowing behind him. I had to meet him, so I ran down to the street and walked to Colonial Kitchen. Next door was Sandy Fisher's Sound Center. I saw the red-haired guy in there, and I went in and told him I had seen him in San Francisco. And he looked at me and said, "I don't remember you, bub." So began a lifelong friendship that has meant the world to me. Jim's interest in life was so huge and so varied. He loved everything about Maryland, especially Annapolis and Eastport. He was a die-hard Orioles fan. For many years, we would go to lots of games together, suffering through the bad seasons and celebrating during the good ones. And he was an ardent University of Maryland basketball fan. Jim was overjoyed when the Terps won the national championship. He was a regular at Pete's Pool Hall, playing with Tommy Thompson, Bobby Jarrell, myself, and all the characters there. He was the manager at the Circle Theater in the early 70s, and he made me his assistant manager. So many bonds were formed there in the theater with Jeannie Hood, Patty Rivard, David Stouter, Peter Cox, and Stephen Raymond Johnson that endure to this day. Jim wooed and married the love of his life, Carol Post, and they raised 3 beautiful daughters who grew up with Jesse and Josiah Badger, David Johnson, and Ben and Jennifer Finkelstein, among others. Family has always been important to Jim. He treated all his friends as part of his extended family, and of course, he was a member of the Grateful Dead community, who consider each other family. He was overjoyed by the addition of grandchildren in his life, and he was extremely happy to reconnect with Kimberly and Eula, his children from his earlier marriages. Jim was the ultimate nice guy. In all our years together, I never heard him speak harsh or rude words about anybody. It seemed he always had a kind or encouraging comment about anyone he spoke with or about. It was Jim who asked me to jam with him and Greg Gabor, and that led to the birth of the Jello Boys. For that opportunity alone, I am forever grateful to Jim. He left the band to work for the post office, a job he held for years and finally retired from. He became the first friend of mine to retire with a pension. 30 years ago, Jimmy, Miller Adams, Cindy and I began meeting weekly on the Ram's Head patio to enjoy a beer and a cigar, which morphed into the weekly meetings that continue today and has become a tradition that includes many friends and live music. We attended scores of Dead shows together. We even went to Europe to go to some Grateful Dead shows. This led to our travels about the Netherlands on boats that we rented to cruise the many canals and rivers of Holland. It was a blessing that Jimmy was able to cruise the waterways one more time this past September with Carol, Jana, and Eric, even though he was ill. He met with Kimberly and Eula along the way, and then he met Nathan, his grandson, at the end of their trip. Another passion Jim had was for photography. Over the years, his ability to take the perfect photo grew exponentially, and Jimmy was always taking pictures, each one worth much more than 1,000 words. All of his photos were works of art, but he refused to sell them. However, he would give them away when asked. Jim and Carol came to Florida to visit Cindy and I in our lazy winter home this past January. He still felt good enough to travel, and we will be forever grateful to them for making that trip. I spoke with Jim several times in the weeks before he left us. He told me that he knew his time was near, and that he had had a good run, and was at peace with his known outcome. Carol, Casey, Rose, and Nathan stayed with him as he began his transition. Cindy and I drove up to sit with him and his family as the end drew near. The night he passed, I was home and sound asleep when suddenly I heard a voice by my front door saying, "Hello." I instantly awoke and lay there, listening. When the voice spoke again, it sounded like Jim's boomy, bassy voice, and it said, "Hello, is anyone home?" I lay there wondering who was in my house when the phone rang. It was Casey, telling me that Jim had moved on. To the Collisons, Cindy and I would like to say thank you for including us in your lives. We know everyone who knew Jim will always treasure their memories of him.
My name's Nathan Sims. I'm Jim's grandson. Growing up with Jimmy as my grandfather was an interesting experience. He wasn't like my more straight-laced grandfather on my dad's side. He didn't quite fit any mold. Poppy liked to wear tie-dye, listen to the Grateful Dead, and his great artistic prize was his Smoking is Fun poster that he hand-drew and hung in his bathroom. I knew something about him was different. From setting the microwave to exactly 2 minutes and 22 seconds each time that he wanted to make his coffee so that the handle of the mug was always pointing towards him, to counting out the correct number of cigars that he needed to last him during a long car ride, and insisting that no one discussed his beloved sports franchises so that he could go home and watch the recordings on the DVR, Poppy had his own way of doing things. When I was about 8, Gaga and Poppy came back from his beloved Holland with a pair of wooden clogs for me. I'd always seen the many pictures and items from the Netherlands in their home, but finally I had a piece of my own. Poppy talked about Holland like it was an old friend. A country that was essentially an infinite canal filled with boats, populated by friendly pot smokers, tulips, live music, and good food. It was a veritable utopia to Poppy. I knew that someday I wanted to go with him. In September 2019, I got to meet Gaga and Poppy on what would be his final trip around the Netherlands. Our weekend together was a whirlwind, but the final night in particular sticks out to me most. It was a night full of stretching the moment. From a prolonged steak dinner to sitting in their room for an hour or two just chatting about anything at all, none of us wanted the moment to end. Hours melted together, sailing by like the whipping clouds above. Poppy traced their boat's path across his several maps to show me the route they'd taken across the country. We talked about what they liked, what they ate, a flower market with blooming tulips as far as the eye can see. He talked about Jana and Eric, his close Dutch friends, and remarked that it's not very hard to see why Van Gogh's skies were so beautiful. Poppy was an old man filled with deep love for those in his life. He never loved perfectly. In fact, he once told me that he regretted spending much of his life really only caring for himself. But his love was nonetheless profound. I filmed Gaga and Poppy as they argued about how much their ticket cost, and then I filmed as I left and hugged them, kissed a cheek, and told them how much I loved them. Poppy shook his head as I aimed my recording cell phone at the door. It may have annoyed him. I just never wanted to forget what it felt like to be filled with so much love for two people who so shaped who I am. We didn't cross the city end to end by any stretch of the imagination, opting instead to just wander from warm spot to warm spot as he fought the cancer. But I was grateful for the time we shared. I connected with Poppy through many things. Watching films in his basement, photography, the Orioles, playing with the yo-yos in his workshop, his dry wit and super sharp sarcasm, and eventually Holland. I'm thankful I got to see him there in his happy place. I hope I will take his example forward, filling in the gaps where he failed to love his family and maybe the way he should have, but carrying his cool spirit and grace. I love you, Poppy. Rest easy.
Thank you so much to everyone who shared a video. Those were really good representation of Poppy, and it was really nice listening to them. I'm saying Poppy because I've got my kids with me, of Dad, of Jimmy. Thank you also to everyone who has given us support over the last few weeks. The cards, the phone calls, texts, the meals, the home renovations, Jeannie and David. No, seriously though, it's meant the world to all of us, so thank you so much. We're gonna end, my mom's gonna read one more passage, and then we're gonna end with a slideshow of photographs because that seems very appropriate for my dad. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
I would like to thank my children, especially, and my grandson Nathan, for putting all of this together and working quite hard on it. And I also want to thank my church and friends for the support and for all the calls that they've made lately. Thank you so much. This is a reading from the 23rd Psalm, which was Jim's absolute favorite. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.
When it's springtime down in Georgia, and it's summer on the Grand Rio, it's still winter up in New York. The man in the rodeo, there's a trailer and a radio that plays country and western songs. Is The season's already started, but he's still up in New York State. The sap is running, and he swears he won't be late. There's a daydream of a Bronco, and he's heading for the fence. But he wakes up in Chevy going west. You can hear them steers a boiling, kicking dust up